confirm when it's live streaming, please.
Hi everybody, just to confirm that we are now live streaming on YouTube.
Thanks, Ben.
Hi Ruth.
Hi Roger, just to let you know, we are live streaming already, just to make sure it was working okay. So I don't know if people want to put the microphones on mute till you start the meeting.
I think that would be a very good idea, and I'll do so. How are we doing, Ruth? Are we ready to go?
With most people here, I'm missing Shirley Condon. Is Rashik here yet? I haven't seen Rashik Palmer yet.
Okay. Simon Pringle, is he here? Yes, he is.
Simon Pringle's here, yes. And Councillor Hinchcliffe's joined us now.
Andrew, I've seen.
Yes.
Yes. We'll just give one more minute, I think. Ruth.
Okay. Just so everybody's aware, we are live streaming already.
And there's Cameron. So, as you said, Ruth, if everybody can be on mute other than you and I at the moment.
Yes, please.
At least we're managing any inadvertent comments for the wires until we get into the meeting proper.
Rashik's here now, Roger, as well.
Are we missing Councillor Pandor? I saw Councillor Swift, I've seen Councillor Blake, I've seen Councillor Hinchcliffe, I've seen Councillor Warren, I've seen Councillor Jeffrey. Oh, Shabir's here. Sorry, Shabir, I didn't see you, forgive me. I think we'll make a start, shall we then, Ruth?
Okay, that's fine, Roger, yes. Thank you.
Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first LEP board meeting, albeit virtually, of 2021. And let's hope it's not too long before we're able to meet in person. And in keeping with the French tradition, which I know we don't do in this country, but I always feel a bit strange about, I will say Happy New Year, because apparently in France they continue throughout January to wish people Happy New Year, and glad to see everybody's safe, and those who've been poorly, Amir in particular, I'm glad to see are on the right side of recovery, and so welcome. We gather on a fairly auspicious day in lots of ways, for sort of three non-connected but important reasons. Obviously, by the time we finish today, or maybe soon thereafter, there will be a new occupant of the White House. I'm delighted to share, and I know my public sector colleagues will probably be aware, but for the private sector colleagues, that the devolution order was debated in a delegated legislation committee this morning in the Commons and passed unanimously. And I think there's a debate next week in the House of Lords. Thereafter, if successful, the order will then be made in Parliament, I guess, soon thereafter. So that's a good news thing. And the third one, obviously that was very local to us, but the third one, not only local, but personal to a member of our board. I hope all of the board will join me in our congratulations to Judith on her elevation to the House of Lords in due course, and with all of our support for a successful process, but also I'm sure she'll be able to continue to brighten the candle for our part of the world as well as the wider north in that role. So we should, as a board, congratulate her, let alone as in terms of our own personal congratulations. So nice one, Judith. Onwards and upwards. I'm not sure how far you can go from the House of Lords, but at least a nice thing for us all to bask in, as well as support. So moving on to apologies. I think many people may have to duck in and out, maybe arriving late, like our senior civil servant sponsor, Peter Mucklow. But as far as I'm aware, everybody is going to attend. There may be one or two people who are going to be late, and that's completely understandable. And we'll work our way through the agenda, which is quite a full agenda. We've got some substantive points to discuss, hence the need to allow discussion and not be constrained by what's previously our 2-hour journey. I should also add that we will have a meeting in February. It'll be a relatively lighter meeting, but there's an important agenda around our employment and skills plan refresh, and I think it's important that we are on the front foot of that, and then we will revert to the 2-monthly cycle as is appropriate. I should just pause and check if there are any declarations of interest that need to be noted in the agenda beyond that which we already know about. So I'll just pause there and see if anybody wants to say anything. If not, we'll record the fact that no new declarations were made. I'm not getting any sense that anybody's saying anything, Ruth, so fine. None of the items, as far as I'm aware, Ruth, require the exclusion of the press or the public. No, we haven't. So we'll move to agenda item 4, which is the minutes of our last meeting of 2020 on the 17th of November. And what I hope we'll be able to do, subject to any comments people have on any particular points within those minutes, is we'll be able to approve them as an accurate record of our debate, discussion, and where appropriate decisions. So I'll just pause there to see if anybody wants to make any comments before inviting, hopefully, a screen of thumbs up to their approval. We seem to be getting, so the thumbs up seem to be coming both electronically and otherwise. So thank you for that. Agendas items 5 and 6. I think Brian Archer. I'm looking to see where Brian is. Is Brian here? He is here. We're going to roll together, and I think you're going to use some slides. They're very full pieces of paperwork, and we'll assume people had a chance to cast their eyes over it. And Brian's going to give a high level, and then pause. I think after COVID, and then after Brexit to have any contribution. So over to you, Brian. So perhaps again, we can keep on mute. There's a little bit of feedback there. It might be my end. So I'll go on mute and over to you, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I'm aware there's a lot of detail in the pack. So what I'll try and do in the next 7 or 8 minutes or so is just go through some of the key challenges and our response with regards to COVID and Brexit, and then that'll allow us a wee bit more time for discussion at the end. So just bear with me while I share screen. Hopefully you can you see that? Okay, excellent. Right. Just in terms of some of the challenges we've got at the moment, obviously some sectors and supply chains are in significant distress, particularly retail, hospitality, leisure and the creative sector. Last week's FSB survey said that 5% of firms were planning to close this year. It's about 250,000 businesses, which was double the previous year. Still a lot of anxiety around the high levels of debt that businesses are taking on, and certainly a lot of feedback from businesses about the spring cliff edge as government support comes to an end at the end of March. In terms of the headline economic data, unemployment stats, unemployment, the claimant count across West Yorkshire increased 87% since the start of the pandemic. We've seen a decrease in advertised vacancies, and also some other factors that are starting to play in, such as staff sickness and self-isolation, beginning to affect productivity, and the effect of a sort of Brexit, COVID, double whammy. Looking at some of the national data, I mean, inflation figures out this morning showed an increase of 0.6%, and the economy shrank 2.6% in November. And this despite a £280 billion fiscal stimulus. We've seen 800,000 job losses and 10 million workers on furlough, 340,000 workers in West Yorkshire at the peak. British Business Bank published their stats last week, and interesting figure was that 106,500 loans were dispersed across Yorkshire and Humberside. Again, just underlining the level of debt that businesses are taking on. The response from business has been to call for a VAT deferral extension and basically extend some of the existing programmes beyond March to try and mitigate some of the impact of that. At a local level, obviously we've been dispersing recovery grants, and I'll come on to that in more detail on the next slide. We're also supporting businesses with digital resilience vouchers, which again is supporting businesses to trade online, and that coupled with support for cybersecurity is being rolled out across West Yorkshire to help businesses. We've also got a peer group learning programme supporting businesses with specialist support from their peers. And in addition to that, we've got a small business membership scheme that we're supporting with the FSB and Chambers of Commerce to enable businesses to get access to support from those two membership-based organisations. In terms of local authority grants and grant disbursements, we've seen 29.7 million paid out to 21,052 businesses through the LRSG scheme. And then the additional restrictions grant, we've seen just over 2 million paid out to over 1,000 businesses in the region. As you can imagine, officers across the local authority and the growth managers and within the LEP working flat out to process a high volume of applications. Last week, Rishi Sunak announced a further 4.6 billion for retail, hospitality and leisure, up to a £9,000 one-off grant based on rateable value. And we're still waiting to hear on the details of how that's going to operate at a practical level. We also saw the self-employed income support grant launched, and that's for those businesses who are one-person businesses running a limited company, and that's that grant's based on average profits over the previous 3 months and is capped at £2,500 a month. Now, in response to obviously lots of people coming off furlough and the unemployment figures, we've scaled up the Employment Hub. Now, the Employment Hub provides all-age employment support and a matching service supporting individuals find work or skills and training and redevelopment. We're also offering free training in priority sectors, again, to support businesses and to support individuals get reskilled and improve their marketability and job prospects going forward. Nationally, government have announced a number of schemes to support individuals as well. Obviously, you'll be aware of the Kickstart programme, which is 6-month placement for young people who've been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And that's supplemented with other things like sector-based work academies, which help unemployed people apply for jobs in new or a different area of work. And it provides them with up to 6 weeks work placement together with pre-employment support, CV, interview skills, work experience placements, and a job interview at the end of it. Lots of additional resource being put into the job centres to provide work coaches and support people find their way back into work. Moving on to Brexit, I mean, I don't know whether I was just going to cover the highlights of the Brexit deal and where we've got to on that, or would you prefer me to pause at this point?
Brian, can we just and just if anybody wants to raise any questions? I'm sorry there's an echo on my end. I hope it's not being received by others. If there are any questions or comments before perhaps the board just notes this report, and then we'll go through Brexit. So I'll just pause there. Does anybody want to raise anything? And Ruth, if you can help me if anybody's raised any physical or electronic hands anywhere. If not, we'll move on.
So could I ask something, Roger?
You, by all means, Amir.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch on, there was a couple of things, well, there was a number of things in it, but I found the fact that the number of businesses that have closed was actually lower than 2019. I found that very surprising, and then the reasoning being that they're supported. So is there any predictions around what is going to happen when that support is removed to those businesses? We're going to have suddenly a big drop. And I think, you know, there's some really, really good programs. I think I counted sort of 7 or 8 programs that are being that are designed to get people repositioned and retrained. And I wondered about the sort of the diversity angle in those, and to what extent they do reach into the BAME community, to women's groups, and to other harder to reach groups, and what sort of work was happening around that. And I did wonder whether the piece that's in the inclusive growth agenda around third sector organisations, whether there was some interface that we could create that is like an intermediary that allows those organisations to impart things to their users rather than the user themselves having to apply for things. And I was thinking about, there's a mosque building that we're involved in, that we're building, and I just thought it would be amazing if there was a big TV screen there, which just came up with all the different courses, all the different things that were available. And there's just this almost streaming of information to an audience that wouldn't ordinarily get in touch with the LEP. And I just wondered whether there was something around that we could achieve.
Thank you, Mayor. Brian, quite a lot there, maybe some to take away to come back on, but maybe you've got some initial reflections.
Yeah, I mean, the first point about the business insolvency rate. The solvency rules were changed during the pandemic, which might be artificially masking what, you know, an underlying problem. It's difficult to predict what the business failure rate will be. You know, when the schemes come to an end. I mean, that's a real challenge, and I think, you know, we need to come back with some estimates based on the different economic modelling scenarios that we've worked at. Just in terms of access and removing barriers to support, I mean, we've started to do a number of things. The first is to map the existing business support provision by deprived area to see what the levels of market penetration are in some of those deprived areas. And obviously we're piloting, you know, the Asian Business Mentor Programme, and we're also engaging with a group of the Chamber looking at barriers to business support for BAME businesses. And I think there's a lot more that we can do in terms of gathering that feedback firsthand from those communities and making sure that that's actually factored into the design process when we're looking at launching new services and new support for businesses in those hard to reach groups. Is that helpful? Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Let's move on through that which I'm not sure what we all thought on the 17th of November when we last met, but where we now are with our European partners, let alone what we might be doing with the rest of the world.
Okay. If I can just pick up on obviously the Brexit deal. The team have been analysing, all 1,200 pages of the deal that was agreed just before Christmas. Key things for us are understanding the implications for West Yorkshire and the impact on our key sectors. There were some highlights and lowlights in the deal. Again, I'll just pull out a couple of them. Zero tariffs is good news for us, but of course, new rules of origin are creating additional administrative burdens for business. The technical barriers to trade on things like the medical sector, medical devices, automotive and chemical standards were agreed, which is good news for those sectors. The financial services framework will be agreed by March 21. And the good news for transport and logistics was that there's no need for the European Transport Ministers permit, which we were assured would lead to free movement of freight traffic. In reality, if you look at Dover, who normally have 6,000 lorries a day going across the border, that's down to 2,000 a day. And that's because of two things: the administrative burden and the paperwork, and also a shortage of customs staff who are off sick and self-isolating. So there is a case for customs people to be classed as essential workers in terms of the economy. EU programmes, we will continue to have access to some EU programmes with the exception of Erasmus, which is an international student placement programme. And there was no agreement on conformity assessments, things like ISO 9000 and BS 5750, for example. Equally, there's no agreement on the treatment of data across borders. So a lot of detail, a lot of complexity, and they're just some of the headlines. And if you're an SME, trying to make head and a tail of these things is a real challenge for business, on top of all the COVID challenges that these businesses have got. So what have we done? Well, we've set up an EU exit response service for Yorkshire and Humberside, which we're leading as the regional growth and cluster lead. We've got proactive business engagement through a contact centre. We're providing specialist help with documentation through the Chambers of Commerce across the region. And we've also contracted with specialist providers to provide legal support for small and medium-sized businesses. We're running a programme of webinars as well for SMEs on key EU exit topics such as employment law, intellectual property rights and new regulations. And we're also simplifying the comms, both what's available nationally, regionally, locally, to support businesses with Brexit, because I think we need to improve some of the messaging on that. And there's some work in progress that we need to bear in mind at the moment. In the light of where we're at with Brexit and with the lockdown and COVID, we'll need to refresh our economic strategy in the light of what we know now and reconsider that at board level. We also are in the process of developing an innovation and entrepreneurship proposition, and this is to stimulate the demand side. It's one thing to reskill, furloughed and unemployed workers, but we need to create jobs for these people to go into. So we're working up a proposition, again, which will bring back to the LEP board and the recovery board with regards to stimulating new firm formation and growth. We have to continue to work on the skills side, on the supply side, and make sure that's aligned to support the key sectors. And then the other point, which Amir raised earlier, was just making sure that we focus on removing barriers to access for some of those disadvantaged communities and entrepreneurs, so that that we truly support an inclusive growth. And then I guess the final point is that we make sure we monitor and adapt our service offer to mitigate the sectoral impact of Brexit. I'm happy to open it for questions and discussions.
Thank you, Brian, and I've noticed, and welcome, Kuli. I noticed Amir's point in the chat about the fact we've done a deal with Turkey. We've done many deals actually around the world, as people are aware, and it's taking advantage of them. And it may be my comments directed to Alan Rees. It may be we should share with the board the paper around our current trading relationships that was pulled together on a sort of Yorkshire and Humber basis, but actually, signifies, and I know that Councillor Hinchcliffe is particularly interested in our relationship with Vietnam. But when it comes to exports, from our region, we export the most when it comes to textile and fabrics to the US, followed by Vietnam. So I knew Vietnam had a significance to our economy, but that's just an illustrative point. But it may be worth circulating those slides, Alan, for that package for information for colleagues. I'll pause there. Are there any particular questions anybody wants to raise with Brian? I don't know whether you want to say a little bit about the support we're giving businesses at this febrile time for them to understand what they need to do and don't do, but perhaps we'll come back to that. Any other questions anybody wants to raise? Councillor Waller, I think. Andrew Waller, and then Mandy Ridyard. Andrew.
Thanks. Just very briefly, in terms of recognition of qualifications, I understand that some businesses are getting very concerned that there's a bit of a fudge at the moment, but they could have some significant staffing issues if existing staff find that their qualifications are not recognized.
Brian, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the non-recognition of UK qualifications in Europe and vice versa is going to it's going to create a challenge and a problem for businesses, particularly with regard to labour market mobility. I mean, the full impacts of which it's probably too early to say, but that's certainly something we could come back on with some more information.
Thank you, Brian. Mandy.
Hi, 2 points. One is it's good to note that the UK has stayed in Horizon and Copernicus, which I think are really important to our university population. But it's really sad to see that we're no longer part of the Erasmus scheme. And I really think we need to pick that up as much as we can within our region to make sure that our educational facilities are supported. My second point is on the LEP website, we talk a lot about support for exporting to Europe. But as a region now, we're exporting to Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland is a hybrid. Obviously, it's not EU and it's not UK, it's a bit of both. And I think there probably needs to be a little bit more support for those companies who are doing that. And maybe we could pick that up on the website.
And I think also progressively how we signpost as well as support, back to Amir's point, people thinking about those newer market opportunities. And just as an illustrative point before I bring in Shirley, the OECD view is that within a generation, whatever that means, Mexico has all the potential to be the 10th largest economy in the world. If you'd said that to me a few weeks ago, that we might think about our relationships with Mexico beyond some of the things that come out of Mexico that we not necessarily we would want to trade, but is traded, I would have been surprised. But that's where I think the opportunities are. I think we need to be on the front foot of it, support with others, the businesses contemplate, let alone engage. Welcome, Shirley, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. I mean, Mandy's right. The Horizon is good news, but the Erasmus will affect an awful lot of our universities right across the country and in Yorkshire. So we do need to be working to put in place arrangements where we can still hopefully support students from and to Europe to maintain that, but the funding goes with it, which is obviously the major challenge. We've already got programs of work for international student placements. Broadly, we need to expand that, but any support that on leverage we can bring about to continue those relationships, because it's not just about the student exchange, it's actually the broader relationships with those universities that have been established in Europe over a long time that lead to research and business development relationships as well. I did have just a point on the about increase in the demand on the demand side, Brian, whether there's anything we could do collectively, where perhaps Yorkshire universities could get involved in that with you in terms of, you know, stimulating the entrepreneurship activities, the demand for your support.
Thank you, Shirley. Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of entrepreneurship, you know, stimulating more graduates into enterprise, business incubators, commercialising some of the ideas coming out of the university, and programs around that as part of this whole entrepreneurship offer are essential. And I think, you know, the universities have a really important role to play in that whole entrepreneurship growth agenda, particularly around commercialisation of knowledge and expertise, knowledge transfer, as well as graduates into enterprise and, you know, more graduate retention. So yeah, totally support that, and
maybe
that needs to be
get Peter to pick that up as a particular action.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley, and thank you, Mark, for your note in the chat box. In just asking everybody if we agree the recommendations on page 45, could I also ask Shirley and Councillor Waller to put their hand up signs down, just because I may just come back to them and think and realise it's all rather than a current hand up. Is everybody happy to agree with the recommendations on page 45 of the paper covering EU exit? Just thumbs up would be helpful. Yep, great. Okay, moving swiftly on to its headline comprehensive. I think it's probably the not so comprehensive spending review, Alan. And again, you may or may not be using some slides. I can't quite remember, but whichever way it is, please carry on.
No, I'm not using slides for this, Roger. I'm just going to draw a few key points out of the paper, and in a sense, there's a bit of old news here, because this is reporting on the comprehensive spending review that was on the 25th of December, which was obviously there are quite a few things that have happened since then. The headlines really, for the second year in a row, the government's had to do a 1-year settlement. Normally these things are at least 2, usually 3 years long. The previous year it was cut to 1 year because of upcoming exiting the European Union. This year it's been 1 year only for because of COVID, which is obviously creates challenges for public services that are attempting to plan over the longer term, and businesses as well who need to plan for the future. We did do a submission to the comprehensive spending review, majoring on the economic recovery plan and the transport recovery plan, including our propositions around carbon, digital, entrepreneurs, and health tech, and some other key asks as well. The government announcements obviously had a focus on COVID and protecting core public services. And once you protect things like health and education and defence, in the current climate, there's not a huge amount of flexibility. And so it didn't include, unfortunately, and then I'll come on to some things that it did. Things it didn't include upcoming funding for future funding for LEPs or growth hubs. Although this may be coming, and we have our annual performance review with BEIS coming up, and this is certainly be something that we will be challenging them on. The second thing it didn't do was it didn't respond to any local economic recovery plans, not just our region. It didn't involve any funding for local economic recovery. So that's something that we are hoping government reconsiders in the future, and it has an opportunity to do that with the upcoming budget. What it did include, so it included a pilot for the UK SPF. So this is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the proposed replacement for the European monies. That's due to start in full, we think, in 2022. There's going to be a pilot in 2021, totaling £200 million nationally. And they also announced a new Levelling Up Fund, which is £4 billion nationally. And this will be a centralised programme which places can bid into with projects of up to £20 million. And we would expect LEPs, amongst other organisations, to be able to bid into those, but we don't yet have the information. We're awaiting the prospectuses on them, and we're engaging with the officials that are developing them and looking to shape them as best we can. Our preference is certainly that in the future, funds like that, particularly where we are now a or in a few months' time, we will be a devolved region. We would hope that funds like this would be devolved rather than us having to bid into central government for them. Although for this year, there will be a centralised bidding process. The other things just to draw out, there were some quite large announcements around funding for skills and employment, including living wage increase up to £8.91 per hour. And they also re-announced some funding around broadband and transport, important for us, access to the £4.2 billion intracity transport fund, which begins in 2022, which will enable us to invest in significant transport schemes of the region over this coming decade. And then finally, there was some new money announced for zero carbon, in particular shift to zero emission vehicles, which for our programme of tackling the climate emergency, shifting away from private vehicles that are powered by fossil fuels is an absolute essential element of it, because of the volume of carbon that is released by private vehicles. So that's a summary. We await the budget, which was in early March. Government gave the country 8 days to do submissions for it in the last couple of weeks. So we have reiterated to them the need to fund the economic recovery plan, among things. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I'm going to bring in Shirley and Judith, but before doing so, can I just ask Andrew Wright to note the point that Mark Roberts made about a wider innovation grouping, and perhaps you can address that when you give your update. So Shirley first, and then Judith, and then we'll be moving into Andrew's space, I think, fairly soon. Shirley, you're on mute, Shirley, still.
I'm sorry, Roger, I just can't get my hand down from that previous question. I can't get it to lower.
Okay, well, if you put when you ask again, put your left hand up, and I'll know it's 2 hands. Judith.
Hi everyone, and thank you for your lovely comments earlier, Roger. I really appreciate it, and obviously I look forward to continuing to work with you all when I do take up my seat later on in the year. I'm sure you're all aware that the Prime Minister launched his Build Back Better Council at the beginning of this week. There are 30 council members on it, one chief exec from Manchester, one from the Midlands, one in Scotland, I think, and possibly one in Wales. And the rest are all businesses represented from the south and the southeast. So picking up on Mark's comments, I really think we need to get our own act together in West Yorkshire and Yorkshire as a whole, and just really come together and demonstrate what we have. And we mustn't forget that some sectors are actually doing quite well at the moment. And I think, we have to reference that as well in everything that we do, really recognise where the strengths are and how we can build on that. But I do find it quite depressing, when we did put a lot of time and effort into the response to the CSR process. And I'm a bit at a loss how we really get our voice heard when we're not attracting representation on these bodies that are set up to assist the whole country to recover. So if we can demonstrate the real commitment and collaboration between business in our area, and then go from that position of strength to make our voice heard, I think that could be really, really helpful.
Thank you, Jude. I think that's possibly a takeaway that I should take away on behalf of all of the board, to think about how we perhaps ameliorate the current position, which is completely unsatisfactory. But perhaps we'll come back to it. It's a good point, Jude. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a similar sort of plea that we use this opportunity to demonstrate that we have got our act together. So this is a little bit more tactical than Judith's strategic point, but it's basically the helpful notes about the Shared Prosperity Fund and the opportunity that provides. It seems to me as a real opportunity for us to build on our getting getting more ambitious in terms of what we've been discussing at the Inclusive Growth Panel around building a framework for involving communities and levelling up within our own region, never mind north and south. And it would be great to see that as a real focus for how we can respond to any expressions or similar, whether it's levelling up or the Shared Prosperity Fund. I think there's a real opportunity there if we could go for it. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Are we happy to just note the recommendation in the in this paper, basically, that we note the conversation that we've just had with a couple of action points, I think, to take forward. And if you could lower your hand again, Kate, just helps me with a screen of 30 plus people to make sure that I.
Like Shirley, I'm trying and it won't. I don't know why.
Okay, well, there you go. Okay, thank you for that. And we're now going to move into the panel and committee reports. I should add that there isn't a special report for the Business Communication Group, but Joanna Robinson will add comments as we go through about what's being discussed with our broader partners across this whole agenda. So I think I'm going to move to you, Andrew. Andrew Wright. I'm sorry to throw that curved ball at you to begin with, but I guess it may be pertinent to the West Yorkshire Innovation Network, which is being created, etc. Andrew.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I'll come back to Mark's point under item 10, I think, where we're doing the innovation special. But yeah, I mean, it does sound like a good idea, doesn't it? So I'm sure we'll be saying yes, Mark. Thank you. Just on the Business Innovation and Growth Working Group, I'll take the paper as read. Quite a lot of our report comes in also through the COVID paper that we've already had. And we've also got this innovation framework coming up. So I'm cognizant in these remarks that those things are happening or have happened already. People will have noted that the business support function is very, very busy, up at least 30%. I wouldn't be surprised if it's up 50% overall in the year eventually. And as we've already reported, there's £240,000 of Brexit support money that's come in since our last meeting. And we have reported at the last meeting that we've redeployed people into the Growth Network staff. So this is trying to pivot to, meet the evident need that there is in this area. You'll be happy to see that grant approvals are at the highest level that they've been for a while. So that at least is good. We're getting through the work. There's too much work to do, of course, but we are getting through it. I'll just pull one particular thing out. I'm going to come back later to another potentially transformational intervention that's being made, but this one's the first of the two that I want to really draw out, and this one is in this section. The Strategic Business Growth Programme, which is the second phase of the High Growth Support Programme, where we pick a smallish company applies and can show that it's got particular growth potential and is exciting, and then we can focus effort on it. And we've got money to support 500 SMEs over 2.5 years in that. And I feel that that's a particularly exciting one, as that's one of the levers that we do have in our hands to really make a transformation. We do loads and loads of really good incremental work, which is so necessary and fantastic that we do help all the people that we do. But all of us are totally committed to the social transformation we want to make in the region, and the things that will really transform it. We don't have so many of those. But I would point to that Strategic Business Growth Programme as a particular example of that. Just a note on inward investment. Exciting to see that we're doing a pivot here as well, noting that organisations are reconsidering their real estate strategy, which is a way of saying that people are staying at home to work, and that what workplaces will be, I think probably quite generally in future, will be smaller, where not everybody has an office or a desk even, but we will still need places for workplace interactions, and thinking about what that means for the region. A lot of opportunity for us. A lot of opportunity for us, I think, in that space in Leeds City region. And you will have noted also the government statement that is it 20 or is it 30,000 civil service jobs to be pushed out from London, and Leeds is one of the cities which is in the frame to possibly benefit from that. So all good stuff, I think. I'll just end this input by pointing to a couple of things that have really come out since our last big panel meeting. We've won, the University of Huddersfield has won match funding of £200,000 from the combined authority and the LEP to go with the European development money for a manufacturing champions program. It's a 3-year program, and again, it's looking at businesses with scale-up potential, SMEs, and it's going to use a particular tool, diagnostic tool, that looks for how technology adoption can particularly help that company. So it's part of our effort to really increase the productivity of some of the key businesses in the region. That program should be reasonably intense. It's going to help 28 businesses are in the frame for that, but it will be a substantial intervention. And the other one, lastly, Women in Enterprise, is written up in the paper that you've already seen, but an exciting one, I think. Female Entrepreneurship Mentoring Program at NatWest have partnered with Be the Business to launch a free mentoring service. And Leeds City Region has been picked alongside the West of England as the people who are doing that. So I think it's nice that we've been, and a good effort that we've been selected to do that, and potentially significant in terms of the life of the region. Okay, does anyone have any questions or things they'd like to pull out of that?
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions, comments before we note the update? And there is a linkage, as Andrew said, to the innovation piece later on, which is a substantive item. If not, we'll move on to Rashik, employment skills, and maybe Rashik will also might just give us a taster, whet our appetites as to what we might be considering when we meet in February, without necessarily preempting that.
Yeah, no, so as you're aware, we're working on the refresh of the employment skills panel, and the substantial focus on the meeting will be bringing forward that element. As you're all aware, we've been working with Susan Hinckley and the team on the Commission for Future Skills System, and a lot of those recommendations will be baked into our plans going forward. So we'll talk more about that in the next meeting. For this particular meeting, I don't want to pull anything out specifically. I think we've got a number of things going on. We've seen the movement around further education, the adult education budget. There's a lot of continued work in helping build skills to help the region be successful. So the big focus is green economy skills, the growth market skills, where we'll focus efforts. I'm assuming you've read the report, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, Roger. So I'm going to assume people have read the report, and we'll bring a much bigger topic on skills in the next meeting.
Okay, any immediate thoughts, questions? If not, we will proceed on. I'll pause. Okay, we note the points in the recommendations, particularly around the progress on the implementation of the AEB, and is it August, I think, we hopefully, if we don't get it before,
correct, yeah, the
42 million part year check will be in the post. Good. Green economy panel, Simon, and I think it's a little while since I can't remember, but obviously things have moved on, 10-point plans and the like. So, Simon, perhaps some headlines that you want us to know again before bringing in colleagues.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Chair. I'm going to actually follow Rashik's lead and take the papers as read, and focus also just on a couple of key points to put some time back into the mix, mainly because we've had to postpone our next Green Economy panel by 1 month. So the next Green Economy panel, which was due to be a little later in January, and were that to have been the case, I could have shared some real detail with you around the progress in the carbon emission reduction pathways work, which is clearly central to where we are currently focused. From that builds a number of important discussions and potential challenges around trade-offs, whether they relate to the built environments, transportation, industry, and so on. It also cross-references strongly with Rashik's panel, particularly around skills for emerging jobs in areas of inbound investment. But for reasons really of progress on that, we've decided to delay until the day after the next LEP board meeting, so that we can put a whole lot of material into the public domain. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of an extended brief in that meeting, and really just direct people to the written updates for this one. One thing I would say is that the role of community and community engagement and other vehicles for communication, including, for example, the arts and other forms of education routes and so on, that we've not fully exploited yet in terms of getting the message out about the interplay between climate on a global level, well-being, wellness, air quality, and community health is something that Kate Hainsworth and I have been exploring sort of offline on behalf of the LEP, and we'll bring some slightly more joined up thinking back at the next LEP board meeting as well, in terms of how we start to really empower civic society in that sort of way, alongside some of the more strategic top-down pathway type work that is ongoing. So that's where I'd just like to update you. I don't want to take time and deal with matters that are just in that written paper unless people have questions, and I shall return in February with some slightly more elaborate insights for you if you wish.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions or comments again before we note the recommendations and move on? No, I don't think there are any. Thank you, Simon. And at this point, I know we haven't had the Inclusive Growth and Public Policy panel yet, but at this point, I just wanted to just make a couple of remarks. First of all, the board's thanks to all the panel chairs, but also to Deputy Chair Mark Roberts for the work he's done over the last year to ensure that cross-panel themes rather than specific deep topic areas, we are actually getting as linked together as we can be. Secondly, and importantly, I think it's reassuring that the interest in the city region from an inward investment perspective has never been higher in my experience to date. And we are at this current point, 2, if not 3 significant inward investment opportunities where we are either are or we're clear we are, if it's not prescribed as such, the UK preferred choice for investment in sectors we're in and sectors we're not in currently. So that's helpful. And to the wider point about moving Whitehall or Westminster to where the real economy is, I know Judith's going the other way a little bit part of the week. Actually, we're on it, and we will make best opportunities. And remind people, when talking about our region, it is a microcosm of the whole UK. So if you're going to move anywhere that's important from Westminster, why wouldn't you move it to the heart of the UK? But it happens to be up here rather than down there. So I think we'll now move to where we are on our spending, or should I say investment of public money, in what is the final quarter of the local growth fund, albeit other funds have come along for time thereafter. It only seems like yesterday we were trying to work out how much we might ask for, let alone how much we've spent, what we've spent it on. But over to you, Melanie, to give us a high level. And of course, hopefully colleagues have read the detail in the paper, but they may have some specific questions. Melanie.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just in terms of where we are with the capital programmes, as you say, Roger, Growth Deal is due to end in the 31st of March. And basically the message is we will spend the entire allocation that has been given to us. We have over-programmed, and actually on economic development projects, it looks as if we will come in over the allocation, somewhere between 4 and 12 million. But the latest forecast that we got were in December, so obviously pre-national lockdown, and that may be a little bit ambitious given the current situation. But we've got the opportunity to maximise outputs, and then on the transport fund, it's slightly different because this is a programme that is running beyond that time frame, and therefore there are a number of projects that will definitely spend and get actual spend complete by the end of March. But there are other projects where there's about £270 million worth of contractual commitments on our transport fund programme. So we are going to spend full allocation. We've already increased allocations on some of the projects that are working particularly well. So we've talked about business growth programme. So that programme was given an increased allocation in 2018. They have commitments now where we've got approvals that have been given, but it depends whether businesses actually take up that final allocation. And we've also got some strategic
inward investment schemes where they're in discussion, and they may well conclude before the end of March as well. So a lot going on, and the key message is there is still risk attached to those projects, but we are predicting a full spend of the programme, and obviously we will try to maximise the outputs against that spend as well.
Thank you, Melanie, and thanks to you and all of your team on behalf of it. I'm sure the board would join me in thanking them for all that's been done. I know it's not over yet, but it's getting close to the end of that, and we'll see what comes thereafter. Are there any questions or comments anybody wants to make on Melanie's piece? I'm checking the chat, there's nothing there. If not, I think we will move on. Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you.
The plan next is that we will, and I think Shabir is going to lead on this, supported by colleagues as appropriate, in the second part, give an update on where the Inclusive Growth and Public Policy panel's got to, but more importantly, that leads us into the Inclusive Growth framework and a wider and longer discussion about the next steps and importantly getting the steer from this board and the endorsement of where we've got to, so that we can actually build on from that. So without further ado, over to you, Peter, and over to you, Shabir. Sorry, I just seen on the chat, welcome Peter Muckler, who's just joined us. Shabir, over to you.
Thanks, Roger. Firstly, the pandemic has actually thrown some stark realities, which is worth reminding colleagues in terms of the impact that it's had. We've seen the socio-economic divide, the gap increasing, and the stark difference has been that there's the disadvantaged communities we already are aware of, communities that live in poverty, and the BAME community. And there's also another emerging sector that I feel that will come on board in terms of people that will lose their jobs, what Brian talked about, who will probably be people who have had reasonable lifestyle. So there'll be another band, I feel, of unemployed people that will come on the scene. So we need to just bear that in mind, because the focus has not been too much on them. But we just need to keep that in mind, because we don't want to leave anybody behind by assuming that, you know, these are the things that we need to do, which is the right thing to do. So the other thing is, I just want to highlight, Roger, is this is not about looking at where things have gone wrong in terms of the community we're talking about. There's also a lot of strength and a lot of issues that are very, very strong with the community that are the most disadvantaged. For example, the asset base that they have. The third sector, we've rehearsed this argument quite a number of times, in the voluntary community sector, the way they actually came and played their own and held their own, working with the private sector and the public sector, actually is something that is all part of that transformation journey. But I think that social capital, we can't just assume that it's going to stay there, and we can't just ignore it and rely on people's goodwill, although that goodwill is always going to be there. I feel that that's key to the inclusive growth agenda that we are talking about, and that will be the driver to what we're doing. I'll come to that in a minute. The sector, as I said, came into its own, and the key to unlocking the assets and the potential of these disadvantaged groups is to actually just understand it a little bit better. Statistics have over time underestimated the potential of the capacity and the energy and the strength that these individuals, mainly volunteers, have in leading their own communities. So any leading to doing what we're trying to do has got to actually make sure that the underinvestment that's gone in the social and voluntary sector is actually pumped in right at the offset. So we actually start on a good footing, and it's really good to know that we've already had some good positives based on what you were talking about earlier on, Roger. Members will also be aware that the Royal Commission commissioned a report around developing national sounding board, and I know Cameron have been part of that. And that sounding board came out with some interesting statistics in terms of the decisions that we make and the impact it has. The chair of the Law Commission sounding board, Andy Haldane, what he said around social capital is quite interesting. he said that it's the economic rocket fuel of the economic growth. I would actually take that argument a little bit further, that rocket fuel, use it once and it depletes itself. And in the context of climate emergency, I wouldn't want to rely too much on rocket fuel. So what I would actually look at doing is developing sustainable fuel in the longer term. And the only way you can do that is to actually invest now in the voluntary community sector, so we can actually develop a new narrative in terms of how that sector actually pumps the regeneration and the economic development that we're talking about. So that's just something that I actually thought of in terms of, rocket fuel. Is that I understand what you were saying, but I think we just need to think beyond rocket fuel. So the evidence is there, Roger, in terms of what they've done and what we need to do, and the focus needs to be on how we actually engage with them more sort of like effectively by understanding the sector, how many organisations have turned over in terms of the voluntary organisation, community organisation, what sort of staffing levels they have, what sort of volunteers they have, because there's been, well, from my understanding, there's not been much research or studies done around that. So we just need to make sure that we understand the cohort we're talking about. We've also looked at developing the good work standard, which is a key priority for the LEP and for the board I chair, for the panel I chair. And much progress has been made with that. And it's really good that we've started to engage employers and building on existing good practice. And we're using the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter as a reference point to benchmark. But obviously we want to do it better than Greater Manchester. I always look at doing something better than our counterparts. We've also undertaken some training around awareness raising around conscious biasness. And we ran a couple of sessions on conscious biasness, and that was a private session. And it was quite interesting to see how we all have our own biasness, including myself. Just because you come from a particular group that might be underrepresented doesn't mean to say that you don't have your own biasness. And these are the things that we need to actually get a grip of and make sure that we actually look at the broad issues that actually impacts on the decisions we make and how we actually move forward on that. So what I'm suggesting there, Roger, is if we can actually start looking at the chairs, especially look at how we can actually develop that unconscious biasness and start to actually become more aware around us, and then evaluate any learning and come back and just sort of have some feedback in terms of, did we as individuals become better, and as an organisation, are we actually more aware of our communities, whoever they are, and has that made us as an organisation better? So I'll stop there, Roger, and I'm happy to take any questions before we move on to the next item.
Thank you, Shabir. And it's interesting, I was struck by the headlines from the recent Joseph Rowntree Foundation report about what one in 5 homes in across the whole country in fuel poverty in 2021. Gosh, we've got a lot to do, but we will get on with it. Any questions or comments? Am I going to hand to Alan Shabir to introduce the framework? Alan and James, or are you going to introduce it?
Shall I just try and take it from my point of view, and then if I miss anything, I'm sure Alan and James will come in and fill it in.
Thank you.
So firstly, we've been talking about the inclusive growth framework for some time, and we actually discussed this in private session some time ago, and we've had a policy group that's been working on the details, and the LEP report that was due to come to the board actually was deferred, and I think this is the first stab at bringing it here. Also, in some ways, in hindsight, it was a blessing in disguise, because we had the pandemic, and we since then developing the West Yorkshire Economic Recovery Plan, which actually should go hand in glove seamlessly with what we're trying to do. And the focus, as always, has been addressing the widening inequality gap. But this has actually now made us focus even more based on what we knew and what we've learned since last March, which is, again, what I talked about earlier on in terms of the most disadvantaged, and how we make the assets and build on opportunities and build up the third sector with the key to actually making sure that we unlock that full potential we talked about earlier on. In terms of the framework, we revised it in December, and there are challenges. Obviously, you know, there are challenges, but at the same time, there are a lot of opportunities in the back of, you know, what we've been talking about for the last few months. And the big prize is the 7 billion growth potential that we can see in terms of our region, and how we can deliver hand in glove along with that 7 billion prize, more inclusive growth to the hard to reach group and the disadvantaged communities. So basically what we need to do is basically just look at how the framework can be adopted, and focus on some key questions, which are the challenges and opportunities. Are they correctly identified? So the framework, I'm sure you've all read it, right? Yeah, we can write issues and have it identified everything. Is there anything there that we need to actually just touch base on? Are the goals and ambitions right? Without the right goals and ambitions, you know, we will be missing a trick. And the indicators, especially focusing on Appendix 2, are they the right direction of travel? Or do we need to just refocus that? And what inclusive growth actions would have the biggest impact in terms of contributing to the asset opportunities which I talked about? And secondly, the issue of inequality across all the disadvantaged groups I talked about, including PME. And both are integral to the inclusive growth agenda, because unless we get that right, then, you know, we will probably not achieve the ambitions across the LEP. So basically, those are the things that I actually focus on. Is and I mentioned this last time, Roger, that a lot of the focus has been on productivity, which is the right thing to do, because this is being generated by the Treasury. But I think there's another aspect that this board can take up, especially now that we've got Judith, who's now going to represent us more with more influence in the House of Lords, is how can we influence the Treasury in terms of making sure that the people side of things does not fall off a cliff edge, because the Treasury has actually invested billions, right thing to do, but the focus has been on business and saving business. And as a local authority leader, and I'm sure the leaders will agree with me, local authorities who have actually been at the forefront, along with the voluntary communities sector, the noises have been right, the words have been right, but the resources that have come behind it were lacking. And that's where we need to actually just reshape national policy, and especially start to change that big engine of the Treasury to actually look at the people side of stuff more, the inclusive growth side of stuff more, and basically provide them with some evidence that you can have excellent productivity by making sure that if you get the inclusive growth agenda right, you know, it'll generate a lot more dividends. So every £1 spent will generate 6 extra pounds, and I believe that could actually be improved a lot more. So I'll leave it there, Roger, and if Alan wants to add anything, or James, you know, just in case I missed anything, but the key question that I pointed out, if members can just focus on that, we can actually get even better framework. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Shabir. And just to remind colleagues before Alan comes in and we have a discussion, which will be, we'll hope I'll be able to manage effectively and inclusively, is the questions that Shabir posed, that we're asked to consider endorsing the framework as part of the wider strategic economic framework, and that as with our clean growth agenda, that actually inclusive growth implications are considered future by both the board and the panel in their reports, their activities in their reports. So, Alan, over to you together with James, maybe, I guess, to lead the conversation. Let's get people's view towards the end objective of this session.
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, one of the points I was going to make was that one you've just made, where part of this conversation is about, firstly, you know, some check and challenge on the mission, the aims, objectives, and so on, which are set out in the framework, and the way in which we are proposing that success in this space is measured. A key thing from our perspective is a discussion around the programs, the initial kind of ideas for the content of a inclusive growth program for the LEP, which is set out in Appendix 3, and getting a steer on people's views on what they think the most important things are would be really helpful. Because if you go to the summary slide near the end, you'll see that the total cost of all of these programs, they clearly need working up in more detail, but the total cost far exceeds what we have. So getting a steer would be really helpful. And the other point I was going to make, one you have just made, which is that clearly, whilst this is the proposals here for an inclusive growth program, actually this is something that needs to be embedded across all our work, and that's the reason for ensuring that as future reports are coming forward, everything will consider the inclusive growth angle. And the fuel poverty one was a really good example, because when we're thinking about our interventions on tackling the climate emergency, so things like scaling up retrofit to improve insulation in people's homes, the way that energy is supplied and that kind of thing, really need to ensure that when we do that, we are doing it in an inclusive way. So just as an example, so that's a key thing I'd like from this conversation is views not just on the aims and objectives, but also the priorities of the where we should put our priorities in the programs that are proposed in Appendix 3.
Thank you, Alan. Before I bring in Susan, I think importantly, people please use the chat if you want to put some contributions in there, because colleagues will pick those up as well as verbal oral contributions. I think the important thing, one of the things we need to do, Alan, is actually have a bit like our recovery plan. What might we like to achieve in the next 12 to 2, 5, 10, etc. And we may have to move that around so that we do get the focus. So firstly, Susan, then Kate, and then Andrew so far. Susan.
Thank you, and thank you, Shabir. It's great actually to see this work taking shape now, and it's got a lot more energy in it, and it's got a lot more detail, which we've struggled with, haven't we, in the last few years. It really seems to be coming together, so thank you for that. I think the one measure I'd like to see is healthy life expectancy. So if we can make sure that as a result, and it's not one that's going to be achieved in a year, of course, but that should be the measure that we're looking at. So everybody in the region should have a good life expectancy. And I keep saying it, but a woman in Bradford spends on average of her life 23 years in ill health. That is appalling. We should all be ashamed of that. I am. And therefore, that's the kind of thing we need to put right. So I'd like to see that as a measure. And also, I think all the programs are very valuable, but I think the stuff we can do with our core business, I think you just said it there, Roger, about changing how we do everything, and therefore, can we change the assurance framework to make sure that every project that happens, both it's looked at from a climate emergency point of view, but also looked at from a equalities point of view, to make sure that people are equally benefiting around the region. And that equal obviously doesn't mean the same, does it? We all know that. So it might mean that different interventions happen in different places to make sure that equality is achieved. So I think there's some, if we're really serious about this, there's some core fundamental changes to our machinery, to our workings that we can make, which will make a huge difference to what we do on an everyday basis. Notwithstanding, these programs are really valuable.
Muted myself. We'll get a few comments together, Alan and James, and perhaps then you can respond to them. So who's next? Kate, I think, was next, then Andrew, then Simon.
Thank you. Actually, what Susan has said fits perfectly with what I wanted to say, which is that whole idea that there is a kind of combined assurance mechanism will actually in itself, I think, be a really effective measure for us to integrate into this process. Because actually, if we are measuring ourselves across all of the work that's happening at the LEP, that's actually probably going to be a much more effective tool to drive inclusion than almost anything else. One of the things that we discovered, we all believed very strongly on the panel, was that this is not work that can be done unilaterally. It is absolutely fundamental that we're working alongside our fellow panelists in other areas, in skills, in jobs, in all walks of business and social life. And it's absolutely crucial that everybody is jointly owning this piece of work. It can't be somehow driven from the corner that is called inclusive growth. So hopefully that is picked up. And just the second point I wanted to make was picking up on Alan's point about priorities. I think that's logical and sensible, but I'd love us also to think ambitious. That these targets are put in place not as some kind of impossible ceiling, but as an ambitious trying to push ourselves. And if we can't find the resources internally within the LEP, actually there's probably some partners out there that we could work with to do that together. So rather than seeing it as confined to what we ourselves can fund, I think it would be incredibly positive if we were to be able to joint fund and partner with others to help achieve them. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you, Kate. Well put. I think as with our climate emerging clean growth agenda, this is one of the small number of golden threads that should run through all that we do. Andrew.
Yes, thank you. I'll echo the comments made about how it's really nice to see the kind of granularity of this and the priorities coming out. So you asked for some feedback on priorities. So I just thought people see that I'm grinding my axe here, but I think it's relevant anyway. It seems particularly bad that on super fast broadband, only 1 in 25 properties generally can't get it, except in the place where the 20% worst economic areas where it's 1 in 3. That just seems just an absolutely extraordinarily stark figure, really, about a disadvantage, really, that is addressed by public investment. So if we're serious about this stuff, it does seem to me that needs to be quite a good priority. And I just question whether we're really showing that we get that and that we really have prioritised it by saying £3 million over 3 years. I know that's probably additional to all the national programmes, and it, therefore, I bear that in mind, and I may have the wrong sense of priority, but £3 million over 3 years doesn't sound to me like the sort of money that's really going to make an inroad into 1 in 5 of our areas.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. As you say, we'll carry through. Who's next? I think it was Simon. I think next. Simon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really just building on the comments there and picking up on something that Kate said, and also to a comment on Susan's as well earlier on. But for me, it's great to see this paper. It's great to see things come through in a more structured and tangible fashion. And what I'm excited about is the opportunity for things that we took as sort of implicit and making them explicit. And we touched a little bit earlier on the joint working and avoiding silo mentality between the different panels and panel chairs and panel members. And I think this is a perfect example of how we can only achieve the outcomes we collectively want to see by creating a big old Venn diagram of overlaps and focusing at the petals rather than at the singular parts. And so if I look at this through the green economy lens, really I see a huge amount that is either directly about inclusive growth, or there are decisions that will be catalyzed that have inclusivity as part of the trade-off decision to be made. Examples of that we touched earlier around around the well-being and life outcomes of people in areas with multiple deprivation indices, high indices, and we're also talking at the same time of powering up our retrofits around hard to heat homes, which are obviously also hard to keep cool in the summer. We know from the BMA there is a very strong correlation between fuel poverty and poor health outcomes for the people living in those homes, particularly as they get older. And it's also a great big lever that we have to decarbonise the economy. The whole piece, probably best exemplified by, in France for the Gilets jaunes, about how one part of society worries about the end of the world, the other part worries about the end of the week, is very much about inclusion and understanding how we create those positive outcomes that are both socially motivated and environmentally motivated. And so having a more structured and frameworked approach to thinking about this is going to allow us to deal with some of those trade-offs, which will be crystallized out by the decarbonisation pathway work that we will be talking about at the next meeting, that we'll have to look at things that are effectively trade-offs, whether they relate to land transport, air transport, the built environment, industry, agriculture and land use. You know, those are not going to be without consequence. And so being able to roll inclusivity and decarbonisation together to make sure that we don't disenfranchise those people who are probably least able to take the consequences of a negative decision as we seek to decarbonise the economy is going to be very, very important. And I'm looking forward to working collaboratively to achieve that. The other tie across, of course, goes to the skills agenda. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we do get overly excited about the high tech and digital skills, but there are also a huge number of skills that are probably going to bring people from different parts of society with us as well. Things that would have been in the old days referred to as blue collar or trades driven skills that are going to be required if we are going to decarbonise society. We're not going to be able to digitise ourselves out of a carbon footprint like the one we've got. We're going to need people with engineering skills to actually retrofit the homes and to look at the power networks and look at hydrogenating the power grid from a heat perspective and you can all fill in the gaps in terms of the things that are going to be required. So for me, this is great. It brings the panels together and hopefully starts us thinking more like a big Venn diagram rather than a sequence of little silos.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for continuing the French theme that we started off the meeting on. But I think it is important, and I'm sure a number of people saw the piece in the Sunday Times a couple of weeks ago from Lord Laird and Lord O'Donnell, obviously gossiping the former Cabinet Secretary about. It's all very well narrative around build back better, but what about build back well-being, which I guess is the theme of this. Mark, over to you. And I'm going to pause, if you don't mind, Cameron and Tom, just to get Alan to perhaps give a little bit of feedback of what we've got so far, and then I'll bring you in if you don't mind. Mark.
Thank you, Roger. Very, very much support this and agree with prior comments. I think it's a great piece of work. My suggestion in terms of the priorities was also to highlight a little bit more the importance of digital connectivity, which I know is mentioned in the framework, but I think perhaps less so in the programs. And I was actually going to make a very similar point to what Andrew made around internet provision. I think that's really critical, as are digital skills. But it's also the basics of actually having access to a relatively up-to-date device to take advantage of the content and things that are available on the internet. And I think that could be included there. And I think this digital connectivity generally is just so much more important today than even a year ago. And I think the future trends will sort of continue for that to be the case. So I'd just dial that up a bit in the priorities and program was my problem.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So if you don't mind, Cameron and Tom, we'll just pause there. Alan, is there any reflections you want to make or comments you want to make on, obviously quite a lot that was covered there, but I think it's useful.
Sorry. Yeah, there's quite a lot that, thank you very much for all the comments which will work in. It's really helpful to understand the steers about where colleagues think the priorities are. I've taken away the point about healthy life expectancy as a key measure. Agreement that we need to build in tackling inequalities and this agenda across all of our work, which we will do. And it's worth noting that the economic recovery plan had as its kind of two core aims tackling inequalities and zero carbon, and it feels like those are becoming the core rules of how we determine what shapes our programs going forward. Point made that we shouldn't just be thinking about the funding that we have, but the funding that partners have as well. Really good point. There's a paper later on the agenda about the progress on digital. The point about the £3 million and is it enough? We'll go away and take a look at that. Funding. And Mandy's made a point about the local digital skills partnership, which has been launched this year in the region. And I mean, the point about digital inclusion, I think, is really well made. The pandemic has shone a real light on this again, where sectors of society, people in jobs who have access to good broadband and good devices in jobs where they're able to work from home, have been less impacted by people who have poor connectivity, poor devices, and have to travel. So I think it's a really good point. We'll take a look at the World Happiness Report. Thank you for posting that, Rashik. So there's a lot there, and I know there's some more comments to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. And I think maybe there's some lessons we could learn from our green agenda and the carbon reduction pathways approach. How we might think of pathways to eliminate fuel poverty, to improve digital skills, etc., etc. Perhaps that's for another day. You've been very patient, Kamran, Tom, and now Shabir. Kamran.
Hi, Roger. Thank you, and Happy New Year to all the board members. So I joined the Inclusive Growth Panel back in December. I attended the first meeting, really interesting. And last year, as Shabir mentioned, I was actually invited by Pro Bono Economics, which is chaired by Andy Haldane, to join the Commission on the Future of Civil Society, which is chaired by Gus O'Donnell. And we had the launch in December, and I sat on a technical panel that feeds into a number of commissioners, including Gus and Andy. And there's just a couple of notes I've got here which I'd like to share, which I think are relevant. I think Leeds City Region has got an opportunity to lead and pioneer this work and really set an example. And I know, Roger, that you're very keen on making our city region one of the best LEPs in the country. And I think this piece of work could be another way for us to position ourselves on how we're leading and pioneering this. I'm in regular conversations with Kate, and we've just launched a new piece of work around inward investment for the VCSE sector here in Bradford district. And I think there'll be a lot of lessons to learn from that. But from the launch event of the Future of Civil Society, there was a couple of comments. So Gus O'Donnell mentioned that they want to see the civil society have the same stature as the market and the state, and thinking about how we do that, building on the community spirit and the social togetherness, which he called. Oliver Dowden was also on that call, and some of the priorities that the government are looking at is how does the government help unlock the potential of the civil society? How do they play an enabling role? Really looking at the digital deficit, and also looking at how can we increase more philanthropists to give more into the sector and more new money into the sector as well, and making the VCSE sector in particular investment ready for new funds to come in. And what does that mean? I think there was a big piece around data and how we use data to better make our case for the sector. Rachel Reeves from Leeds West was also on the call, and one of the things she said about the civil society and linking it to devolution was around how that the civil society has the ability to power communities to participate, not just be represented. So they've got that frontline engagement, they've got real depth into communities. So how do we use that to make communities better participate in devolution, not just represented? Andrew Law, who funds the Law, they're the biggest funders of the Law Family Charitable Foundation, which has paid for this particular commission, and recognizing that charities employ as many people as financial services do. So really recognizing the value of the third sector. And then there was a number of other comments, but I think my final comment, Roger, is this, that there's a huge amount of potential in this work. I think I can speak for myself, and I'm sure Kate would echo it. There's a huge demand on leaders in this space now to be more engaged, to contribute more. And I think there is issue around capacity, and really putting a challenge to the LEP on how do we release the capacity of people within our district to make sure that our case, our region, and civil society is better represented, and we have the ability to really contribute and engage. I've put a challenge to Pro Bono Economics to say that we want to see how we feature Leeds City Region as a case study in the work that they're developing over these 2 years. They've made it clear that whatever they do, it's not just going to be a policy or a report that sits on a shelf, but with Gus's connections in Whitehall, really wants to make sure that it's something that's implemented. And I guess it's really for us to think about when we're thinking about inclusive growth and the representation and engagement of VCSE sector. We're already under-resourced, and I think there's always a lot of demands on leadership within that sector, and we need to free up time and bandwidth for leadership so we can make the best case for our region and make us all wealthy and not just our sector. But I had a conversation with James Flanagan as well, which was great. I'll continue to champion our city region, our sector, our district. But I think just a bit of capacity from the LEP would really go a long way in helping us bring in a lot more investment into this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. Those are really, really helpful words. Now we'll come back to that, and I hope you feel and others do that it'll be continuing our evolution as the best LEP in the land, not aspiring towards it, but it really is the next stage of that important journey. Could I just turn to Tom? And sorry to keep you waiting, Tom, you waited patiently.
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, I think it's a really good piece of work and it's come on really well. I think the challenge now is to turn it into practical action, particularly this year, given the challenges that we're going to hit with keeping the French theme, Le Monde après COVID, I understand is the words that are used in France, the world after COVID. And I think that will be, huge issues around youth unemployment and as one example where we would want a bit of a call to arms by the private sector and others and investors to do more on this agenda. And I think there's a lot we could do to tell the story a bit more about the good things that are happening already in all the districts. On the private sector side, I myself and Judith were with a developer yesterday who is giving rent reductions to companies who take on a number of young apprentices, for example, in quite considerable amounts. And we have the work that came out of the LEP with the JRF Foundation and the work on the anchor institutions where, we've got a really, we're absolutely driving that forward in Leeds, where there's one of our institutions has doubled the amount of local procurement that takes place from SMEs in the city region. The third sector, I think, is something that is worth us taking a little bit more time over and just understanding a bit more about the pressures that Kate and Cameron have described. They've had a decade where you've really gone away from the funding of core capacity in that sector, as we have in the council side, and so it tends to be funded through commissioning of direct activity, and that doesn't leave a lot for the sector to engage in the same way that the others do. So and our third sector is not the same right across the region as well, so I think it's worth us digging into that a bit with them and understanding it a bit more and seeing the really good practice that's there as well. And I think the private sector sometimes just doesn't, there's a big will there, and I think that will's bigger after the crisis, but we need to make it easier for them to know where to go and how to make the biggest impact and move them off the sort of painting fences stuff and onto using their skills to help that sector really, play an even bigger role than they play now. So I think I think we need to get very practical and almost storytelling next, because I think we have got a really good story to tell. This isn't just theory. A lot of it is happening already, but we need to do even more.
Well put, Tom. I'm going to go to Shabir again and then back to Alan before we perhaps round up the conversation and obviously look to the recommendations we're asked to consider. Shabir.
Yeah, thanks, Roger, and thanks for all the valuable comments that have been made there. It's really good to actually get such a wide, diverse range of views and feedback, so I really welcome that. Just to repeat myself, what I said earlier on, Roger, I think there's an opportunity here, because one of the things that we're trying to do is address the barriers to inclusive growth. And we, as a LEP, we as local authority leaders and wherever we come from, we will try our best and do our best to make sure that them barriers are broken down. But there's some barriers that we just can't break down, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. So, example with the Treasury, when they divvy their monies out from national government, or when they start in their bidding processes, there will be very strict criteria, and I understand that they are changing the yellow book, or whatever colour book it is. I know they're changing it. But having said that, the focus will still be on the raw data around economic growth, productivity, and all the rest of the hard PIs. And I think what they're missing is the soft indicators, the qualitative data. And the qualitative data is only available through the stuff we're talking about in terms of, people matter. And if one thing that has taught me a lesson is people do matter in this pandemic. The economy, faltered, flatlined, and we're going to try and come back stronger. But actually, it's the right thing to do as well, because if you actually do it, put some money behind some evidence-based research in terms of what difference that makes, and actually put a bit more resource behind the voluntary community sector, who can then come up and say, look, this is what we've come up with, these are the dividends it'll pay. Then we need to use that, especially on the back of the mayoral combined authority and a new mayor, whoever he or she may be, to actually give that person some evidence-based arguments to go forward, because that's where we really need to change that national policy, that there's more to this than just the hard PIs around the economy. It's also about the stuff we talk about. So I just thought there's a lobbying thing we need to do as well at the same time.
Thank you, Shabir. I think there is we've got the reason. I think we've got the resolve. We need to know exactly what are the elements, the here and now, medium, long term, and to Cameron's point, the adequacy of resources to progressively deal with these things. And maybe, as you say, Shabir, with an incoming mayor, perhaps gain share the clues in the title. Yes, skills. Yes, inward investment. Providing, upping the skills, providing better jobs, but also how do we improve people's lives in a way that we haven't done hitherto? And actually, what's also our appetite for maybe risk on investments that provide high returns, which means we can then leverage that to good aim. But anyway, I'm going to pause there, and with your agreement, Shabir, to come to Alan, just to perhaps reflect and not so much summarise, and then I think we'll bring the discussion, unless there's any burning points, to a pause, because I think it'll be a continuing discussion this, and seek your views on the recommendation. So, Alan.
So thank you very much, Chair, and thanks, colleagues. Firstly, I'm obviously not going to play back to you every single comment that's been made. All really, really helpful, and rest assured that everything in the chat is being captured. There are six key points I'm going to make. So firstly, I think I'm hearing broad agreement and welcoming of the work and agreement to the overall aims. Secondly, a need to build on the proposed measures and make sure that we're capturing measures around, in particular, health and well-being and happiness. Thirdly, a need to look both about how this is delivered across the both the public, private, and third sectors, and making sure that we are working together, pulling in the same direction, and drawing on resources as best we can. Fourth, a need to build on what we are already doing and communicate, because it's not as if we're starting from scratch. There's a lot of good work that we're already doing, not the LEP, but partner councils as well. That we need to build on that. Fifth, the call, and really well made point about how this is an agenda that cuts across really everything that the LEP does. So yes, there's a program here, but there's a need to ensure that it's built in across the piece, whether that's in digital or low carbon or in business support or others. And then lastly, a key point, which is the focus that we now need to do on translating these proposals into a deliverable program over the next 1, 3, 5 years.
Thank you, Alan. And I did notice a point that Peter Muckler put in the chat bar. You don't need to come in, Peter, but if you wanted to come in and make, from an outsider's perspective, in its broader sense, not in its literal sense, by all means do so before I go to the recommendations. Peter.
Yeah, thanks very much, Roger, and a really good discussion. And I think what's really impressive is the way that people with different responsibilities are thinking laterally about how
different aspects can be brought together with the multiple wins for the same investment, because that has to be the name of the game when resources are constrained. But I just want to endorse the point, and that a couple of colleagues have made around retrofit, the retrofit of the homes that we live in, the jobs that can make available to people living in our communities, the upskilling that's required to the existing workforce, and the opportunities to tackle multiple problems, including fuel poverty. And I was just wondering how, if there are area-based schemes, as the Construction Leadership Council is recommending in its draft national retrofit strategy, the LEP and constituent local, and local authorities can show leadership to that, and whether there is some opportunity for synergy with rollout of infrastructure for high-speed digital connectivity, the areas that haven't got it. So just that observation, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So, as Henry Ford said, vision without execution is just hallucination. Well, we're not a group of hallucinators, so we will crack on. So, can I check in with you that the recommendations that are set out on page 102, particularly the endorsement of this as part of the wider strategic economic framework, and the across the board inclusion of inclusive growth implications, is something that the board is happy to endorse. And again, thumbs up would be useful just to get a gauge of, yeah, it would appear is the case. So thank you, everybody. We're now going to move to our next substantial point, namely the innovation framework. I'm sorry with to use my American quotes, but actually rather than one that was an American from history, one that's got a degree of currency, although perhaps now President Trump's gone from the White House less so. General Mattis said innovation at the speed of relevance, and I guess that's an interesting comment to reflect on. So over to you, Andrew, I think.
Okay, good. Yes, thank you. So innovation framework, I hope you've all seen the appendix, which is quite a nice presentation, even in a presentation format, which therefore I'm not going to go through because I think you've seen that. But I did want to just use the time that we've got for discussion here to really try to get you to give us some support, hopefully, for the priorities that are represented in that, and maybe even above that point, that innovation itself should be one of the absolute key priorities for the LEP. And I know I hope some people might want to speak up and support that. There is a vision statement at item 2.7, which I won't read out, but I think it's good, and hopefully that's something that we can pick up. The idea of easy navigation around this landscape, and the idea of connecting and collaboration for new, better solutions for business growth. That it's quite a nice statement, I think, of where we need to be. So why should it be a priority? Why should innovation be a priority overall for the LEP in terms of all the various things that it's doing? Well, we know we've got the government's target to hit 2.4% of GDP on innovation, and that as Yorkshire we're sadly short of that. We know that we've got a specific challenge in that we've got nearly 30,000 SMEs in the region, and not so many large companies, certainly not so many large companies with large research centres. So we've got our work cut out. However, back to the point that I made earlier in the big panel input, if we really want to transform what we can do in the region economically, innovation and productivity must be one of the key ways that we can make, with our relatively limited resources, we give ourselves a chance of really making a difference. So I hope people will want to speak up for this being a key priority overall. And then secondly, have we got the priorities right within what we're saying on innovation? And you will have seen the priorities that have been quite nicely consulted through 2020 and got some very good feedback from the people who did give feedback on that. So I think it's some good work has been done to gather evidence, and then we've checked that people are agreeing with it. But do you agree with it is a question today. And And I think coming back to Mark Roberts' point earlier in the meeting, the economic hardship that so many are facing at the moment can be a spur to innovation. There is an opportunity here that we can pick up. So I know Sarah Bowser's on the call, and I think the idea of getting a small group together to look at how we can use the spur of the economic woes that they have and see whether there's a group of companies or sectors that we can particularly look at where innovation might be specifically relevant to help with the economic recovery is a good idea. That isn't in the priorities that are here at the moment, because I guess it's a new thought. I'm just going to pull out 3 or 4 of those priorities and then pass back to you, Roger. Innovation, availability of innovation finance is a very key problem that is evident to me as an individual, and some people have heard me say this before, having done a number of startups in Yorkshire. The venture capital infrastructure here isn't as good as it would be if we were in Oxford or Cambridge or somewhere in the south of England. That's really something that needs to be addressed. The idea of inclusive innovation, yeah, and that fits with so much of what's been said already today in this meeting, doesn't it? With the employment and skills plan, now got a lot of support for entrepreneur ideas built into it. But this is a place where I also wanted to pull out the MIT REAP program, the Regional Entrepreneur Acceleration Program, which a number of us around this virtual room have had quite a lot of involvement with. And it's focus on the idea concept, where you look for the innovations that are really going to make a transformation and you differentially try and pour your resources into that. And through the Build and the LEP programs that are running now as pilots, although they feel more like pilots when you look at them, we've got some very good involvement already with some 200 companies involved, a number of us around the table involved as mentors, and all sorts of things coming together there. And a special for Leeds City region, really focusing on social transformation, not just economic or technological transformation, although I'm sure we wouldn't turn our nose up at those things, but really particularly looking for new social solutions to societal problems, particularly global problems. And that's the focus. So that's the third one I wanted to bring out, which is the 4th one down in terms of priorities: availability and focus on innovative startups. And then lastly, which is also on the list, and I'll just pass back to Roger here, investing in centres of excellence. And we have some embryonic ideas for how we can do more in that area, but it is probably an area where we have been light, and relative certainly to the south of England, very light, and perhaps something that we can really try and put some energy into in the coming period. Roger.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. And I guess the end result objective is to take the economy to what would look like today an extraordinary growth that becomes a new high level ordinary, and the dividend, some of the dividend from which we feed back in and fuel the challenge of the previous section, the previous item. And it's interesting, if I could just share, having been invited to give it evidence at the House of Lords Science and Technology Committee, and I'm just thinking, Judith, one day I might find myself the wrong side of the room when you're there. But anyway, the fact that when you actually look at what's happened to date, there's an arc way south of us around Cambridge and Oxford that's had a huge amount of investment. And surprise, surprise, they've done rather well. And there's a need for not levelling up everywhere. There's a need for fairness, not favouritism, when it comes to this, the allocation of resources. We know why. I think we're beginning to develop the what and the how. And I think the important challenge is how funded by both taxpayer and otherwise going forward. But I'll pause there and see if any colleagues want to add some comments. Otherwise, now should be your hands up, but I don't know if it's a hands up from last time or not. And if it's not, by all means, come in. And I'll also then go to Simon, Mandy, and Helen. Shabir.
No, sorry, Roger.
It's hands down. Okay. Simon, do you want to come in, as I said, then to Helen and I think Mandy, I think she had a hand up. Yes, she did have a hand up. Yes. Simon.
Yeah. Thanks, Roger, and thanks for the paper there, Andrew, as well. And as you'd anticipate, I'm very supportive of this this ambition and the endeavour, and this being a priority focus for us. I mean, I've never had to declare an interest as being a professor of sustainability and innovation, but I am, so I guess I should declare that now. And with one half of that that title, I'd also draw our attention to the Venn diagram concept we talked about before. And there is, of course, a huge overlap between the decarbonisation aspirations that we have and commitments we've made, and the need for innovation in its broadest sense to drive that. So very supportive that we have a healthcare focus in there, but given the extent of commitment that we've made both to inclusive growth and by extension inclusive innovation, I would really urge to put an explicit reference to the decarbonisation / broader sustainable agenda in there if we can do, just to tie that together nicely. The inclusive piece, I think, is really important, and one thing that struck me, and I know this is not intended to be a tech-only innovation strategy, but I think it would be really quite meaningful to draw out just a recognition that innovation isn't just tangible. It can really relate to different ways of working, innovative ways of adding value, customer service, value propositions that relate to differentiated service delivery and so on. And as we are seeing the economy digitize itself quite rapidly, I think the innovation that is using the new technological advantages rather than necessarily bringing the products to market is equally key in adding GVA to the region and building new job opportunities to people. So as a priority, wrapping those two things together, I think is really important. I know it's in there, but perhaps that might be brought further to the fore in terms of when it's translated into practice. Really recognising and respecting and rewarding those, and then using and we hinted at this before, and Roger alluded to it earlier about the convening power that we have, as well as the direct sort of intervention and ability to sort of create strategy and direction, and the ability for us to share knowledge and celebrate success across this space is really important. And I think it is really encouraging for others who may be struggling a little in terms of driving innovation or finding the funding to understand that other people have found success across the region, and that there is knowledge and potential mentorship out there, not necessarily in a old school knowledge transfer networky sort of way, but more in terms of trying to facilitate those slightly informal clusters, drawing on the lessons that our colleagues in the south of England, or perhaps through the MIT stuff, I'm not quite sure what the content of that is, but certainly the lessons that we learned with our sort of exchange trip, as it were, to Austria a few years ago, about how those really successful clusters develop and build their own momentum, whether that's in this area around health tech, healthcare, other areas of potential innovation. We'll see, but clustering and using our LEP abilities to convene, I think, is going to be a contributor to success. But I welcome the paper, and I'm obviously going to be very supportive of it as it goes forwards, Andrew. So thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I think we should just also remind ourselves of what we've actually done during the life of the LEP to date in this space. The support through us of public money into the Nexus setup at the University of Leeds, these phase 2 of the 3M Buckley at the University of Huddersfield, and not to be limited to those institutions, but all whenever we can. The recent announcement of a UK space agency joint partnership with the LEP and the University of Leeds around a space cluster is just are examples. This is about, actually, for me, how we actually make this more holistic as an endeavour, and also help tease out some of the priorities of sectors of tomorrow, rather than just getting better at sectors of today. But anyway, Helen, you've waited patiently. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, really supportive of this, and particularly the vision or statement 2.7, and also I really note the partnerships with HE providers in here. But just wanted to pick up that if individuals feel inspired to innovate, they need to be taught how to think creatively from an early age. And I think with the lack of creative subjects in schools. This is becoming an issue, and that pipeline for people who can really think creatively, holistically, thinking about, as you were just saying, Roger, kind of the future and future world and future businesses, there is becoming a gap. So it's just to note and to see whether there can be anything. I think there was a reference made in an earlier item about school ambassadors. If there can be some work done with schools to look at how creativity with regard to innovation is being taught in schools.
Thank you, Helen. I think I'll run through. There's Mandy, I think's next, Kate, and then Susan, and then we'll pause there. And if Andrew's got any comments back, we'll take them, and then we'll move the agenda. So, Kate, over to you. Oh, sorry, Mandy. Forgive me. Yeah. Forgive me. It's Mandy. Sorry, my fault. Mandy.
Thanks, Roger. Great piece of work and really support it. I think I watched your evidence, Roger, for the catapult centres and the innovation work going on. I thought it was really interesting. And I think as a region, it would be interesting to see what percentage of businesses in our region use that facility and use Innovate compared to the national averages. And I think that when we're looking at our website, we signpost help from the LEP itself, but it would maybe be a good idea to have a one-door strategy where we also highlight Innovate grants that are available, the work that the catapults are doing, so that businesses can actually see that and have one place to go to rather than have to find their way through the labyrinth, if indeed they find the labyrinth in the first place.
Thank you, Mandy. And I know, Joanna, you want to come in, so I will bring you in shortly. Kate.
Thank you very much. I'll keep it really to the point. I'm really focused. I so welcome the paper. Thank you so much for bringing it. I think it's really interesting and full of great stuff, and lovely to see that cross integration already happening. So thank you for that. It's really with the diversity lens that I wanted to reflect on the way that we reach out. So it's just kind of recognizing that in order to reach those harder to reach communities, and often those that you know, for whom the LEP and the work that we're doing of any sort is really not on their radar, I guess picking up on Amir's point earlier on today, that actually we take the trouble to be bespoke and innovative in the way that we reach out and engage. And the flip side of that is perhaps also being innovative and brave in terms of risk taking in order to support innovation amongst those communities. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Susan.
Yeah, I'm in danger of repeating exactly just what Kate said. In that I think the word innovation can too frequently be synonymous with elitism, actually, and I think we have to be very careful to make that any programs about innovation are truly inclusive. It's great to see that there's ambition in there, but some of the programs listed in this paper have been a bit minority sport. They've not been there for everybody in every part of the region, and I think we need to learn from that. And so I'd like to see, I know the ambition is there, but I'd like to see practically how you're going to make that work so that it is going to be inclusive of everybody. Everybody's got equal access. Everybody can be an innovator. How do we support them to be so?
A good challenge, Susan. Thank you. And you've heard me say this before, but I like to keep reminding myself, what do I mean by innovation? And I mean inventions which cost money to develop with commercialization that makes money for the economy and generally and specifically from it. And we keep reminding ourselves, and as you rightly say, the ability to invent is not elitist. It's in all of us. Some will work and some won't. I think, Joanna, you wanted to come in, and I'm going to go back to Andrew to perhaps summarise and hopefully get your agreement to the recommendations on page 176. That means this framework also becomes part of the wider CEF that we've just discussed when we talk about inclusive growth. So, Joanna, sorry about you earlier.
Thank you, Roger. Yeah, I fully support this framework. I think it's really vital for us within our region. I think we've been behind the curve for far too long, and I think this, when we discussed this at the BCG, it was really well supported, widely supported, which is great to see. But I think the point I want to make is, I think if you can see a positive in the recent COVID situation, it's that businesses everywhere have needed to be innovative to survive. So I think we really need to seize upon the time, because I think it's really important that now they are open to change and thinking about things differently, that now's the right time for this paper, and the practicalities of rolling this out is now, and we need to seize that.
Thank you, Joanna, and I hope, Andrew, you've noted Shirley's comment in the chat box, which is a very polite way of saying, how do we make sure it's easily digested? Or that's how I've interpreted it. So but maybe if Shirley wanted to come in, by all means do so, and then I'll go to Andrew.
No, I think it just needs to be a bit more accessible. I mean, just to say something about the University of Bradford, our motto is give invention light. And something simple that, and I do think this is what it's about. It's about giving invention space, light in an innovative way.
Yep, give invention a chance, give ideas a chance. And that's hence why we have our programme, albeit it's early stage, IDE at, Innovation Driven Entrepreneurship at. But anyway, thank you for that. Andrew, did you want to just quickly summarise, and then I'll just check? Although I think I've already got the answer because the comment's already made, but I will check formally.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, so thanks for all the support, and I'm sure we've all picked up the messages from Joanna and Mark and Shirley there as well about seizing the moment. Now is the moment. Innovation, if it's ever important, is even more important now. So hopefully I think we've all got that. We've picked up that perhaps we could consider making the green focus one of the explicit sectors as well as health. I think that's an idea that would be something that we could think about, and sharing knowledge and celebrating success. Yes, I'll come back to that a little bit with the MIT REAP stuff again. Thanks for bringing in space, Roger. We're going to come back to that under digital under the next item, so we'll just say a little bit more about that, and Mandy will help me with that, I think. And then a one-door strategy for all the things that we're doing, and signposting other government things like Innovate UK and Catapults as part of our offering, as part of the LEP. I think we do that at the growth team level, but maybe the website isn't quite as clear on that as it could be. And I've had that remark 2 or 3 times over the last week, actually. So there may be something there for the comms group to think about how we act as a conduit for all the various innovation supports that are available to companies out there. It is a bit of a labyrinth, and there is a lot of support, but it can be quite hard to understand. So the last one I just pick up was Susan's nicely put point about it being a minority sport, and it's hard to make it not that. I think I'll take that on the chin. Yep, there's a bit of that about it. However, I think the point about education and getting in at education level from Shirley and Helen is part of the answer to that. Starting young, definitely. And then under the MIT REAP, I think we did make it's probably slightly overstating it, but it's a global program, and Leeds did make an impact globally by saying that we were going to major on social problem solution. And I think that in terms of getting people who wouldn't necessarily normally fall under a kind of academic-y kind of innovation banner interested and potentially excited about it is working. So if we look at particularly the build program that's been running for about 3 months now, it's getting ahead of steam up. We had 40 or 50 companies wanting to be part of the chosen group that would get the special support, and a high proportion of the 20 that we've picked are doing social problem solution. And partly a result of that, and partly a result of our comms strategy, we have a good number of BAME people involved in that, and not necessarily a natural sort of usual suspects type of group of people who will be going forward with that. It's a pilot at the moment, but I think we're demonstrating that by being imaginative about how you do proactively get involved with these people who might have really transformational ideas, it can be a non-standard group. Okay, Roger?
Thank you, Andrew. And Mandy, who listened in, and I hope it wasn't too cringy to that select committee. I did lay down the gauntlet for catapults around the country to recognise, if the microcosm of the whole UK is here. Why aren't you engaging with us? Even you may not be here, but we have a lot to offer, and they have a lot to offer us. And I'm pleased to say that 2 of them have actually reached out since. So hopefully others will do, but it's also down to us. I also wanted to headline that, and if Julie nods, I'll have remembered correctly, it's the 15th of March is the start of our West Yorkshire Innovation Festival Week. And just to draw that to people's attention, let alone anybody who might want to participate in some way, shape or form. Just as a diary note. And on that, are we happy to endorse the recommendations that are set out on page 176 of our paper set, and a few thumbs up will be greatly received? Yes, we've got them. So thank you. And we're doing okay on time, but maybe running slightly behind the sort of 4:30. And I'm going to ask Andrew if you'll start this off, and I'm just going on off camera because I need to make a little trip, but I'll leave you to work out that all in a moment. So Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, okay. So on to the next item, the digital board briefing. The digital space is a key strength of the region, and the success of the digital festival, which is written up in the paper, I think is a testimony to that. Such a success that it's been being followed up in autumn with a number of activities in the second wave, and really, really very good, and really generated a lot of clicks and a lot of attention, and nationally significant. So just point to that really as an indicator that this digital board remit here and the emphasis that we have on digitalness is a key strength, and something that we should continue to press up. It comes out of the paper, doesn't it, that there is a myriad of programs and money pots which the government throws up at this, whether it be physical infrastructure, training, culture change, many different dimensions of the digital space which you can potentially get money for, and which we are indeed strongly looking for money for. So I think that the idea behind the digital board, pulling all of the various thoughts in these areas together, is strong, and I'd like your endorsement of that really. And the particular themes that we've pulled out: digital opportunities for all digital business, digital skills and opportunities for all, a thriving digital sector, world-class digital infrastructure, so that's the broadband coverage stuff that's already come up today, and also tech for good development and deployment, so doing it in an inclusive way, and perhaps particularly looking at some of these businesses that can make a difference socially as well as in a technical or academic manner. The board's been asked to oversee that for the region, and Kirsten England would normally have been making this presentation, so she hasn't been able to come this afternoon, so I'm afraid that's why you've got me, the B team. But as you know, Kirsten is nationally involved in promoting this agenda, and is a strong advocate for it. We get good attendance at the board. There's usually up to 30 people, and we get people from Whitehall and all sorts involved, and it's a strong message. The key messages to take away: the Economic Recovery Board has prioritised digital, and lives transformed by digital tech is one of the 4 themes in the Economic Recovery Plan. So it's a big tick for that, and one of the "how are we doing it" answers, I think. You can see from the paper just the variety of things that are going on, but I'd pick out particularly the Made Smarter programme, which is about making particularly manufacturing, but other kinds of business as well, more productive by using digital. It's the Digital Inclusion Programme, and there's also the additional infrastructure provision. I'm just going to ask Mandy Ridland to say a little bit now. She's chairing 2 initiatives at the moment that are significant in this digital space. One of them is the LDSP, the Local Digital Skills Partnership, where we're one of the first 7 in the country to be doing it, and also space, which could come under innovation, and we did refer to space in the innovation section just prior, but it's also significant digitally, particularly when you look at the users of data. So Mandy, do you want to just give us a couple of minutes on those bits?
Yeah, the Digital Skills Partnership first, I think. We started in October 20, and we put together a fantastic board, which I'm co-chairing, with some big hitters on there: Channel 4, ASDA, Lloyds, the Good Things Foundation, and Digital, Ernst & Young, PwC, BT, there's a whole load of others. So it's a really heavyweight board. We've had 2 meetings so far about fact finding, and we at the end of the last one have concluded with our work streams, and they fit in with a lot of things that we've mentioned today. So the 4 themes are preventing digital exclusion, and that's about connectivity, about access to equipment, and about data poverty. So all those 3 things are critical to that work stream. Then looking at engaging SMEs and charities into digital growth, so how we do that. Thirdly, how we support educators and students to grow their digital skills. And finally, the development of a regional skills prospectus to ensure provision is available for all residents in our region. And I think the final thing to say is that local authority engagement is growing. And we really need that. We really need the local authorities to engage, to give us our maximum impact and to make sure we support the wider strategies of the combined authority. So it's a fantastic piece of work and we're looking forward to continuing with that and reporting back on it. The second thing that I'm chairing is the Space Cluster Growth Strategy. So a little bit of background. First of all, space is not about a man in a suit. It applies to all of us, and it applies to a lot of the problems that we've mentioned here today. So, for example, we all use phones and our sat navs, they use space technology. What we're doing at the moment is involving space technology, but it can also monitor glaciers on a world basis. But we can also look at, we talked about health in our region, so using space technology to monitor air quality, water quality, to look at flooding as an issue. There's so much that it encompasses. 2 areas in it are key. So upstream activity, which is satellite building. And it's interesting to note that 40% of all satellites in orbit in space are built in the UK. And then the downstream activity, which is all about data. So as a group, we have won funding. So that was won by Anna Hogg at University of Leeds. To map our region and to come up with our strategy, but it's going to be based around how we firstly grow business in our region through incubating startups, growing scale-ups, and attracting inward investments. At the same time, maximising the enablers of innovation. So looking at working with all the universities in our region, how we best link up and collaborate businesses and people that are relevant to this with the university work that's going on. We have some fantastic expertise. And finally, then launching that strategy and communicating it and building a network of companies. I think what we'll find is that we have a lot more space companies in our region than we think, and we need to badge that and promote it. But we'll wait to see what the consultants that we've just started this work with come back with to really finalise that strategy. So thanks.
Thanks, Mandy. Very good. Just a couple of other points to note. We're looking for some additional funding from various pots that might have availability to support the work in health tech and the health tech cluster, which has got a big digital dimension and an area where Leeds City Region has potentially got quite a lead on more a global position. And also just to note the work that's been done on the LoRaWAN, a local wide area network where you can use small battery items to talk to an internet-like or a cell-like setup, which is potentially launching new technologies. And a number of us are hoping that that can be prioritized in our region and resources put that way so that we can be seen nationally as a place where that technology can be trialed and piloted as a way of really making a difference digitally. So that's it, Roger. I think the ask today is to endorse what we're saying and to note that all the various things that are happening. But I think there is a concern that we've asked for a lot of government money, which if it comes off will be great and we'll have some great momentum. Reading between the lines, I think we're a little bit concerned that we may not get as much money or maybe nearly as much money as we expect. And if that's the case, what would the LEP feel about, what would we all feel about where does this work sit in our overall priorities if it doesn't get extra funding? Okay.
Thank you, Andrew, and not at all seeking to put Peter on the spot, and perhaps not for now, but one of the benefits of having somebody like Peter is Peter Mucklow is his ability to help us. I remember, and I've forgotten her name now, Bernadette Kelly. Yes, Bernadette Kelly. I remember years and years ago we had a particular issue, and she was really helpful. But as I say, that's not an ask of Peter as we speak, but a good point to make. And as Mandy said, I think we are, and I'm particularly surprised because of something I'm involved at the moment, as to how strong actually we are in various aspects. And some board members will remember Eric Hawthorne being a member of this board. Radio Design in Shipley and Pace and all of those other businesses that were and are world leading. So all power to your elbow, Mandy, and certainly I, for one, and others on this board will do what we can to support. So, are we content, colleagues, and with the suggestions on page 120 in terms of the conclusion of this discussion? And thumbs up as usual will be fine. That's great. Thank you. So from extraterrestrial to on the ground tunnels, bridges, or otherwise. To a strategic rail update, and I'm indebted to Mark Roberts for deputising, well, that's unkind, that taking the lead on TFN and other things, as well as being a member of the LEP board, member of the Transport Committee. So Mark, I think, is going to give us a quick run through of where things are at. It's obviously very topical about the need or otherwise for the HS2s of this world, East, NPR, etc. So Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and I will try to run through this update quickly. I was also trying to think of a French connection to this, and all I could come up with is rail stratégique. So let's hope that we take that in the spirits it's intended. So there's been lots of recent developments on transport and connectivity in general, and I think rail in particular, coming through our own Transport Committee, but also the Transport for the North Board, where I represent us as a LEP alongside Judith Blake. There's a wider connectivity plan that's still being finalised, and that's going out for consultation soon. In fact, I think that's next week, and I'm sure that will be coming to a future LEP board meeting soon. So this update really relates mainly to the recent rail needs assessment that's been published in December by the National Infrastructure Commission, and it will feed in to the forthcoming integrated rail plan that's being written by DFT. Its purpose is to recommend how all of these proposed rail investments, such as HS2, Northern Powerhouse Rail, Transpennine Route Upgrade, and Midlands Rail Hub, should all fit together. And so today I'll also talk briefly about Northern Powerhouse Rail. I will take the papers as read, but just given the importance of this and actually some of the complexity of some of the different lines and how it fits together, I just wanted to share these few slides. So I hope many of you will be familiar with these programs, but this first slide just shows really what they are. So HS2 is in various phases. There's 1A, London to Birmingham. There's 2A, West Midlands to Crewe. 2B is the eastern leg that connects the West Midlands to Leeds, also Crewe to Manchester. Then Northern Powerhouse Rail really connects the east-west with a new line connecting Manchester to Leeds via Bradford. Also delivers some important upgrades on the East Coast Main Line, and then some further electrification and line upgrades elsewhere. And then there's the Transpennine Route Upgrade, which is upgrading, and some very important upgrades really on the route linking Manchester and York. So if we move on to the next slide, please, James. I think just wanted to highlight my view, and I think it's our view of the importance of both north-south and also east-west. And I think this really unlocks the most productivity benefits for our region. So HS2 East, the eastern leg, covers 13 million people, 20% of the population of the UK. And I think we talk a lot about levelling up. This is a really important element in levelling up. And we think this is going to contribute an additional 4.2 billion per annum and potentially 50,000 additional jobs in the Leeds City region. Northern Powerhouse Rail would have more than 4 million people and puts about 135,000 extra businesses within 90 minutes of our city region. And certainly as a business owner myself, I spend a lot of time commuting to various places, and I personally find it actually quite easy to get down to London, but actually quite difficult to get across to Manchester and other parts, and end up driving to do so. And actually this would hopefully change that by bringing our sort of very complementary regions, especially for the many small businesses within our adjacent regions, would bring them a lot closer together. So if we move on to the next slide. The rail needs assessment was published, and I'm going to share our view from West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and I guess that's quite a challenging view. Yes, in this rail needs assessment, which is quite a lengthy document, Trans-Pennine route upgrade and decarbonisation are recognised in all of the scenarios put forward, but I think there's a real focus that on this regional connectivity is just not sufficient to address the levelling up agenda. And actually from that, it does seem that our region's being pushed to make a choice between Northern Powerhouse Rail and the eastern leg of HS2. And I think, you know, those of us involved, certainly also the Transport for the North, are saying this is it's very important that we do have both. And actually the view is that, you know, there is a national initiative on HS1 that has been overspending, and actually we're seeing in this rail needs assessment that it's the regional budgets that are potentially being squeezed to cover that overspend, and I think in particular this impacts the east of the Pennines. And also we feel that, you know, the approach and the methodology in this particular report has some flaws in it. We think the HS2 growth strategy is ignored, that there's some economic benefits, particularly from the eastern leg, that are downplayed, and the capacity constraint at Leeds doesn't seem to be recognised. And none of the scenarios in this rail needs assessment deliver Northern Powerhouse Rail in full. In addition, freight, and I'd be very interested to get the sort of views of this board on freight in some of the comments later, gets little mention in the rail needs assessment. Just outlining on Northern Powerhouse Rail, TfN board have now endorsed the initial preferred network approach for Northern Powerhouse Rail. It's important to say that obviously until the integrated rail plan and the associated funding comes through, this is an endorsement of the TfN board. This is statutory advice from the TfN board, but nothing is final. And that proposed network, it talks about a new line between Manchester and Leeds via central Bradford, would give significant upgrades of the East Coast Main Line from Leeds to Newcastle. It would drive a lot of electrification and speed improvements between Leeds and Hull, and also that electrification and upgrades connecting Sheffield to the HS2 network. And I think this is going to go to the strategic outline case of the government in spring, and potentially, if we get approval, some of this work could begin within the next few years, mid-20s. And the last slide that I'll just sort of put up, I'm obviously not going to talk through this because there's a lot of detail there, but I think it's important that I just wanted to draw your attention to it. This is the summary of the strategic case for Northern Powerhouse Rail, which really talks about sort of why this is very important, the case for change, actually what we think the solution would be, and then talks about what the NPR program is. And I just wanted to draw your attention to that. So that's the update. I just wanted to spend a few minutes and thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain that. In the paper, we would like some feedback on the paper, and obviously any comments welcome here, and sort of picking up with either myself or Councillor Blake, or you know, any of the officers. And I think we've got Liz and James from the transport team on the call as well, if they would like to come in with any further points that I might have missed in that summary.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry, Mark. Thank you, Mark. And perhaps Julie could, as a takeaway, just circulate those slides because they are really a good summary of what is a very complex landscape. And we need to hold the Secretary of State for Transport to to account based on his Yorkshire Post article of a week or so ago that Northern Powerhouse is alive and well, and that infrastructure investment is critical. So perhaps we just, as a community, when we get the chance, keep reminding him of that. Councillor Waller wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to support Mark's comments about connectivity. I think that's very important, and from the York perspective, ensuring that we're all linked up is vital. I think the concerns really are that the proposals for HS2 end up being very lopsided. That Lancashire get everything, and we get, well, what's left over. And to bring the French connection in, having long conversations with our twin in Dijon, they had to battle hard to get reconnected to TGV, and the economic importance of that was a key aspect of their future growth. So it is vital to be on these fast rail links. As former passenger accountant for GNER, Mark, I would say that including freight is vital, because that can create bottlenecks on the network. And whilst you do want to move a lot of freight onto the rail and off the road, there are knock-on effects that you have to recognise. So it is very vital that's included. And really, to touch on reduced budgets, Councillor Blake and I were at two meetings summoned by the Transport Secretary to have a Northern Accelerator and to move things forward, but actually looking at the way in which budgets have been eroded and Network Rail are concerned, I think that the bread and butter stuff could end up being delayed when we actually need it to be implemented. So I think there are some dangers to be aware of, and more power to your elbow, Mark.
Thank you, Andrew. And yes, it is interesting, isn't it? As a member of the Williams Rail Review, and the recommendations are imprinted on my brain as to how it should be moved from control at the centre and should be operated differently. I'm not quite sure where we've got to, but I'm not sure that we've got much further. I think the centres seem to have got a greater grip on the whole thing, and that's not well, it certainly wasn't the intention. So thank you. Any other comments before? And again, subject to some thumbs up, we know the recommendation in the. Did you want to come back in, Mark?
Only very, very briefly, just to thank Andrew for his comments. Transport for the North have been very clear on their views on the rail needs assessment, and I just wanted to inform colleagues that we're in dialogue about how we can best support as a LEP our public sector colleagues on the eastern side of the country who have also made their thoughts very clear. So we're in dialogue about that. And I also wanted to say I totally agree about Andrew's point on freight, and I think that is a vital part of the network that we include.
Thank you. Okay, so quick thumbs up just to confirm we're happy to. Yeah. Okay, we're now on the home stretch, Angela, and you've got two items, which is the kind of where we are on planning and budget, and very quickly on corporate performance. And subject to any questions on this topic, we will hopefully conclude on or about the 4:30, unless Peter wants to say anything more generally. It's obviously a sensitive time, but I always like to give our senior Whitehall supporter the opportunity to add any comments if he wishes to do so. No necessity. So Angela, over to you. And there you are. Over to you, Angela.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. I will keep it brief. Hopefully you've had the opportunity to look at the report. So the first one is a heads up on the business planning and budget work that's underway. It will be no surprise that this is proving an extremely challenging year for setting our budget. And budget working group is currently working through the final days of getting a budget put together that we could take to our meeting on February the 4th, and Roger is part of that member working group. The report highlights some of the challenges clearly the pandemic is part of that. The state of funding for local authorities, combined authorities and LEPs plays into all of this. We have, however, been doing our business planning, and Appendix 1 gives you a summary of our current position on our plan on a page. There is a level of detail below that we're finalising, that we will take through the combined authority also, and that will ultimately also become a LEP delivery plan for next year. So highlighted some of the challenges in doing this, and I think to draw attention to the closing paragraphs in the report, really, which is we are concerned that we are still waiting to hear future funding. We are waiting for confirmation of some of the core funding for next year, and also what is the successor to the growth deal. And I know you've touched on this earlier in some of the reports, and all the plans and the ambition that you all have to deliver against the economic recovery. So flagged there again, we have our annual performance review with BEIS next week, and we'll be raising some of these issues with them. So at this stage, this is just this report's for you to note. If there are any comments, happy to take those away, and we'll report back once we have got a budget set. We are close to balancing it for this year and next. It is a difficult year to do that budget planning, but we will hopefully draw that to a conclusion in the next few weeks. I'll pause there, Roger, if anyone has any questions, and then move on to the next.
Thank you, Angela. Any comments? Other than to wish Angela well in terms of our balancing act, and not raiding our reserves, but making sure that we are agile in our accounting policies. No, I think we'll move on, Angela, to the performance update.
Thank you. So this is your regular performance update and covers the usual areas. The first section is currently a revenue budget, just to confirm the figures are obviously slightly in arrears, but we are working towards that being balanced by the end of the year. And as Roger said, without drawing on our reserves in any significant way, which will be an achievement. The Appendix 1 gives the latest revenue position. Appendix 2 gives you the progress on the indicators. So we have been monitoring our KPIs, and there's some good news in there. I think despite the challenges of the pandemic, we have been managing to continue to deliver. Draw attention to paragraph 2.8. Since your last meeting, we have had the statutory accounts finalised, audited and approved. They went through governance and audit at the end of November in time, in line with the statutory deadline, unqualified audit opinion and unqualified value for money conclusion, which is a good result. And highlight that the LEP financial statement, which you considered earlier last year, was also part of those audited statements and is unchanged from the one we published for you last year. Corporate risk update is included in the performance in Appendix 2. No surprise of the risks in there. They haven't moved since last time. I think they will continue for some little time. And the final part, under the internal audit work that's happened, internal audit have been updating the whistleblowing policy and procedure. There has been one in place for some time. It's just been dusted off, updated, clarified in terms of the process to follow, ensuring that it is easy for any user to find it on the website and use it if they wish to bring any whistleblowing allegations forward. We do report on whistleblowing through our Governance and Audit Committee, and we'll report back here if there were any issues flagged of concern. So it's here for information for you. We hope to finalise it shortly and get it out on the LEP and Combined Authority websites. And I will stop there for you. I think you're on mute, Roger.
Yeah, Kate, did you want to raise something?
I did actually. Sorry, I don't want to delay anyone because I know everyone's been here a long time, but it just crossed my mind that the comment you made about raiding of reserves, I just wondered, in terms of your risk analysis, Angela, whether actually there is viewed to be a corporate risk about sitting on reserves. It's certainly something that's been raised by our trustees in the context of so much pain that's going on around us, that we're seen as somehow, I don't know, making sure we're all right and not getting the money out there. So there's a kind of collective view across certainly the charity and grant making sector that we ensure we are getting money out as much as possible to those organisations that need it right now. So just checking on reputational risk. Thanks.
Good question. We do have a reserves policy that we revisit each year, and that will accompany the report. I'm happy to bring that for the LEP board to see at a future meeting. Our current reserves are 8 million. They are based on a level of risk. They are set in a way that takes into account what our income and expenditure is in the coming year, where risk might arise. And we do seek to keep it as low as we can, but ensuring that there is sufficient there if we need to. 8 million against a revenue spend of 100+ million and capital of 200 to 300 million. It feels close. So we certainly hope we're not sitting on anything artificially and stopping things happening out there.
And in circumstances where we continue to support the concessionary and other fares to enable to maintain the pre-COVID bus and other route networks, even though for all the obvious reasons they may not be being utilised as much as they might do outside of such circumstances. So thank you for that. Peter, I know we're in the dying moments of this meeting. Was there anything you wanted to comment, add? By all means, please do so, but not required.
Yeah, there wasn't particularly, Roger. I mean, I think that there's the general and obvious point that, as with everybody else, central government, departments presented with a very, very long list of immediate issues related to lockdown 3, and that's not to say that decisions on the long term that have been referred to maybe a couple of times during this meeting will be delayed or delayed indefinitely. I certainly sense a will to grasp the nettle on some of those long-term decisions, and with budget set now from the Chancellor Spending Review for 21-22, then I'm hopeful that in relation to the sort of penultimate item that we'll have clarity in good order in terms of the LEP's budgetary position for that year. That's all I really wanted to say. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Peter. Just a couple of footnotes just to remind people of that Innovation Festival Week commencing 15 March. We will have the next LEP board on the 24th of Feb, where the substantive items will be around skills and perhaps the clean growth agenda. Thank you to everybody for the formal contributions, for the inputs, for the challenges, and I'd like to just perhaps bring the meeting to a conclusion by some words of one of my former partners in our Christmas card, that a wish for the future: more resuming and less zooming, more fraternising and less sanitising, and vaccinations to enable vacations. And as Mandy has just stolen my line, I was going to finish with the French thing. It's not goodbye or good night from me. It's au revoir. But the question is, what could be the theme for next meeting, if there is one? But thank you everybody for all of your contributions to what's been a very full meeting, and we've covered a lot of important ground, and I am privileged to have such an involved and committed board of colleagues. So thank you, and go safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roger.
Thanks, Roger.